Permit Required Confined Space Training for OSHA 1910.146. This is for authorized entrants, attendants, and entry supervisors. Confined space is defined as anything an employee can bodily enter and perform assigned tasks, has limited and restricted means of entry or exit, and is not designed for continuous occupancy. In order for a confined space to be a permit-required confined space, it must have at least 3 of the following characteristics. First, it must contain or has potential for a hazardous atmosphere defined as risk of death, incapacitation, impairment of ability to self-rescue, injury, or illness from one of the following: flammable gas, vapor, or mist in excess of 10% of its LFL, airborne combustible dust that meets or exceeds its LFL, oxygen less than 19.5%, or oxygen more than 23.5%. Second, for a confined space to be a permit-required confined space, it must have the potential for engulfing an individual. Third, an entrant could be trapped by sloping floors. Last, it contains other recognized serious health or safety hazards. The employer shall evaluate the workplace for permit-required confined spaces and inform employees by posting danger signs or by other effective means. Here at Loveland Products Greenville, we have over 100 permit-required confined spaces with their entry points covered and labeled as permit-required confined space. Examples are formulation and pack tanks in each formulation unit, storage tanks and containment, Calgon rainwater filtration tanks and their sumps at the lift station, and sprinkler valve sumps. The attendant is the individual stationed outside the permit-required space who monitors the authorized entrance and who performs all attendance duties assigned in the employer permit-required space program. The attendant knows the hazards of that confined space, including signs of symptoms and consequences of exposure. He is also aware of possible behavioral effects from hazardous exposure to entrants. He also continuously maintains an accurate account of authorized entrants in the space, such as time in and time out, and name. The attendant remains outside the space during entry operations until relieved by another attendant. He can enter confined space only if trained to do so and has been relieved by another attendant. He also communicates with entrants to monitor their status. He monitors inside and outside the space for hazards during entry to determine if it is safe for entrants to remain. The attendant must call for immediate space evacuation if they detect behavioral effects from the space environment, the area outside the space becomes hazardous to the entrants, or if the attendant can no longer safely and effectively perform all duties. The attendant must be able to call for emergency personnel if required and warns unauthorized personnel to stay away. The attendant performs no other duties that may interfere with their attention to the entry in progress. In short, the attendant's only job is to make sure the authorized entrants are safe and remain safe. If anything changes and makes the entry unsafe for the authorized entrants, the attendant stops the entry and gets the entrant out as safely and as fast as possible. The entry supervisor knows the hazards during entry, symptoms, signs, and consequences of exposure, and ensures the attendant and entrant are aware. He verifies that all entries on permit are valid and all tests on permit have been completed before entry by entrant. He terminates entry and cancels the permit when necessary. He verifies that rescue services are available and can be summoned, removes non-authorized individuals who enter or attempt to enter the space. The authorized entrant knows the hazards, signs, symptoms, and consequences of exposure. He properly inspects and uses equipment and communicates with the attendant to enable the attendant to determine their status. Authorized entrants alert the attendant whenever the entrant recognizes a warning sign of exposure or detects a developing safety hazard. The entrant exits whenever the order is given by the attendant or the entry supervisor, or when the entrant recognizes warning signs or detects an exit condition or evacuation alarm. Before any work can be performed inside a permit-required confined space, notify the maintenance manager, the area supervisor, and the safety manager. These individuals will make sure that the proper forms and procedures are followed, such as lockout-tagout, hot work, or line breaking.
They will also verify that all affected employees are notified that there is a permit required confined space entry to take place. Management will verify the space is safe for entry. We do this by first making sure the area is clean. Using maintenance inside a formulation tank as an example, the tank has to be cleaned out with a final purge of water and drained of all liquid. Second, make sure everything is locked out using our lockout tagout procedures. Example, verify all sources of energy and chemicals leading to the formulation tank is locked out, tagged out prior to entry. Once the confined space is verified to be clean, the space is checked for a potential hazardous atmosphere. Here you see the safety manager checking the top, middle, and bottom of the tank using a 4-gas analyzer. The following gases are analyzed: oxygen, which should be between 19.5 and 23.5%, carbon monoxide, which should be less than 35 parts per million, and hydrogen sulfide, which should also be less than 10 parts per million. Never enter a confined space until all protective measures are complete. If any of these readings deem the space to be hazardous, use forced air until the hazardous atmosphere is removed. The documented hazards have been removed, and retest the atmosphere until the results are within its allowable limits. Only then can you enter the confined space, once all protective measures are complete. PPE required for a permit-required confined space entry must be inspected before each entry to verify that it is capable of protecting the entrant. All safety harnesses must be inspected for cuts or worn belt threads and that clips properly work. If there are any defects in the safety harness, turn it in to the safety manager and get a replacement. Safety harnesses are to be tight enough to hold the individual, but not so tight as to restrict movement. They are not made to be worn loosely. If the harness is too loose, tighten it so that it can protect you from a fall. Remember, safety harnesses can be loosened if they are too tight, but if they are too loose and you fall, it can slip off. Also, verify that the tripod has no cracks or broken chains, retrieval cable is not frayed, retrieval gear is set up properly, and emergency stop works as intended. If used, the venting fan and hose work properly, monitoring equipment calibrated and working properly. If needed, a clean respirator properly working with the correct cartridges. And finally, the area is clear of foreign material that may interfere with operations. In conclusion, the entrant can only enter the confined space after verification of equipment, documentation, and approval from management. The attendant monitors the entrant while in confined space and notifies entry supervisor of any changes in surroundings that would affect the entrant and deem the need of an immediate evacuation of confined space. Lastly, the entry supervisor monitors attendant, the entrant, surroundings, and documentation. If you follow these guidelines, confined space entry will be a safe success.